Hello, friend. My name is Derek Harder, and in this video, we're going to start looking at how you can apply deep learning systems to processing textual information, so human readable text. So we're going to be looking at the topic in general of natural language processing, so known as NLP. And also in this video, we're going to get started looking at the basic so you have to do some special things to prepare textual information for learning with a neural network or a deep network. Okay, so in this video, we'll look at standardizing the text and how the biggest thing is you have to turn human text into numbers in order for it to be processed and modeled by a deep learning system. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first, just a few things about natural language processing. Text is a sequence data, but it's not exactly like a time series, right? So it's not that we're taking measurements at regular intervals, but the sequence, the series does matter. So, it shares, it's more like time series than, processing images, okay? So in computer science, we refer to human languages like English or Mandarin as natural language. So that distinguishes them from computer languages, like Python or Java or something like that, right? So a machine language, like a computer language like C, um, was designed, so its starting point was a human engineer who wrote down the rules as a set of formal rules to describe the language. So the rules came first. The engineer designed it and created the rules before the language. So that's not the way that natural human languages work. So they're shaped by evolutionary processes, so it's a whole study of the evolution of languages, and it's meaningful. So like biological evolution, languages evolve in their usage and their vocabulary and things like that. So the rules, like the grammar of English, are usually formalized after the fact. So people look at how how a language is actually being used in a population, and then they try and come up with formal rules, right? But that stuff is often messy. The people don't. A natural language doesn't really have rules, right? We can impose a little bit of that sort of an order on top of it, but those things in real speech are ignored or broken by its users. Okay, so while machine readable languages are highly structured and rigorous, so in every way it's much easier to build a compiler for a computer language. Natural language are not that. They're messy, ambiguous, chaotic, sprawling, and constantly in flux. So they're very tough to build systems to deal with. But yeah, in this section, we're going to look at how we can do that, how we can use machine learning and large data sets of natural language corpuses to give computers the ability to, quote, understand, okay, right? So I would put that in quotes, that, these aren't general artificial intelligences, but they can do some impressive things, right? It's gotten even more impressive with the advent of deep learning and deep networks. So just some examples of what we can do. So what's the topic of a text? So that would be a basic classification task that you're familiar with. Does this contain abuse? So trying to find content that you want to filter out. Does this text sound positive or negative? So we did a sentiment analysis, and it's really kind of a binary classification, unless you have more levels, and then it could be a multi-class classification, kind of a similar idea. What should be the next word in this incomplete sentence? So modeling languages, and this is kind of the basis, the starting point of what we think of as generative AI nowadays, right? So it should be the next word that we have here. How would you say this in German? So translation. So we'll look at an example of sequence to sequence translation in this unit later on. How would you summarize this? So natural language summary is a very important kind of example application. So So, in much the same way that computer vision is pattern recognition applied to pixels, a natural language processing deep learning system is pattern recognition applied to words, sentences, and paragraphs. All right. Okay, so an important first step if we want to handle text for deep learning systems is that, deep learning networks, deep learning models, they're basically differentiable functions on top of tensor operations, right? So we need to differentiate over a sequence or some set of tensor operations in order to optimize and find the sets of the weights that will give us the lowest loss, right? So that's fundamentally what we're doing with a neural network. So being differentiable functions, they can only process numeric tensor. So we can only use numeric matrices and biases and things. And that means that the input has to be numeric. So we have to convert everything that we put into input as numbers so that we can perform tensor operations with it against our weights and biases, right? So you can't take raw text as input. We have to do something about that, okay? So vectorizing text is the process of transforming text into numeric tensors so that we can actually use it with neural network systems, okay? So the text vectorization process basically always takes this form. So first we need to standardize the text. So, here we're going to do things like converting it all to lowercase and removing punctuation. So this will be dependent on the task that we're trying to do, but we want to make certain that we make it as easy as possible for the system that we're building. So certain things won't matter for the system that we're building. So after standardizing text, we need to split the text into units. So this is called tokenizing the text. So we need to split it up into tokens, right? So so a word like the cat, a sentence like the cat sat on the mat would be broken up into usually white space is the most common way that we tokenize sentences, at least in English. And then we're going to do something. This is kind of really the vectorization. So we're going to do something to convert each of the tokens into numbers, right? So you convert each token into a numerical vector that would usually involve first indexing all the tokens present in the data, okay? So normally what you do is you have to look at the full corpus, right? So whatever all the text is that you have in your system, you want to find the complete set of words that are possible, and you assign a unique integer index to them. Okay, so that's what these are. Is after the whole corpus was analyzed, we assign index 3 to the word the, and index 26 to cat, and so on. Okay. And then basically, once we have integers like this, we can encode those like with one-hot encoding or multi-hot encoding or other methods into a set of vectors that represent the input samples coming into a machine learning, a neural network. Okay? So the first step in that process is in the process of vectorizing text is text standardization. So beforehand, a machine doesn't know that I and I, lowercase and uppercase, are the same letter. Okay, so text or that characters with accent marks. Might be, some words might be the same word, but have with or without accents. Okay, or like in English and other languages that really some words are the same thing, they just have different prefixes or suffixes, like staring and stared. Okay, so text standardization is a basic form of feature engineering. It's making the task easier for your learning system. So it'll be a little bit context dependent. So the different tasks need different kinds of standardization. So some things will be more or less important depending on what you're trying to actually do with your textual input. But there's some usual basic ones. So to standardize the somewhat, at least for English text, we'll usually want to convert everything to lowercase to remove, so that we don't have differences like words at the beginning of the sentence being treated as a separate token, just because it has an initial capital letter. Unless we need it for the task, we'll often just throw away punctuation characters. Although, sometimes punctuation is important, like in sentiment analysis or something like that. We might, depending on context, we might get rid of, accented characters, those special forms. Stemming, we won't do this in our next example here, but this is a common thing to do for English or languages that have suffixes and prefixes, or have different versions of words that are really the same word, just different verb forms or other kinds of forms. So often stemming is applied where you get the word. So we would turn instances of caught, catching, things like that into just catch. And maybe also stem like plural nouns. Cats is just cat. So with these standard techniques, your model will require less training data. Okay, so we will reduce, we're feature engineering basically. We will reduce some things that don't help the model that would end up with different tokens, identify that that's really the same token for our model. Okay. So after you standardize your test, you have to break up your text into units that can be vectorized. Okay, so this is known as tokenization. So there's three kinds of different approaches. Word level tokenization is what we'll use for the examples in this unit. So, in English, that's usually things that are separated by space is the usual indicator that we want separate tokens, although, again, in context, it can be a lot more complex than that, right? So a variant is to further split words into subwords, so kind of like the stemming that we talked about. N-gram tokenization. So we'll talk about two basic approaches to building models in a second here. So often for some types of natural language processing neural networks, it's better to use what are known as N-grams, like 2 grams or 3 grams, also called bigrams or trigrams. So in that case, tokens are groups of consecutive words. So so the cat, if you have the cat sat on the mat, you have bigrams like the cat, cat sat on the mat. So we'll talk more about doing N-gram tokenization. And character level tokenization. So in practice, for most natural language applications, this isn't a useful kind of thing to do, but you'll see it in specialized contexts like text generation or speech recognition. So in general, there are two kinds of text processing models, and we'll talk about both of them a little bit in this unit. So those that care about word order are sequence models, okay? So those generally can be more powerful, but in order to make them work, you often need a lot of data to get a sequence model working good. So you can have others that really don't worry about the word order. So they just treat the words in a unit, like the words. So if you're using sentences or like reviews, which are kind of more like paragraphs, as your sample, they just treat the input as a set, right? So these are known as bag of words models. Okay, so for example, previously when we did the IMDb sentiment analysis example, it was really a bag of words, so we used a multi-hot encoding. So whether was the word present or not present, that was what we passed in. So I mean, in both cases, I mean, you will do tokenization like we talked about. So building a sequence model, you would use that kind of tokenization on white space usually. If you're building a bag of words model, we would need to do that tokenization, but we might build up what are known as n-grams. So we'll do n-gram tokenization. So I already gave this example. Word grams, n-grams are groups of n or fewer consecutive words. Okay, so if you're doing a 2-gram or a bigram for the cat sat on the mat, like I already said, you would end up with these bigrams: the cat sat on the mat. You can do trigrams or 4 grams or 5 grams. I haven't seen anything that uses more like bigrams or trigrams usually, but same idea for trigrams. So you would have these potential trigrams in the set. Okay? So the reason why these are important for bags of words, so models that are treating the words just as sets, is that these, now the bag of word approach isn't order preserving. It's not an order preserving tokenization method. So, if you're just doing a 1-gram, a unigram, and that was what we did for our first IMDb sentiment analysis example that we did a while back. They were just 1 grams. So, it ends up being just a set. It doesn't preserve the order. But when you're doing a bag of words, you can get some order preserved by doing bigrams or trigrams, right? So, again, if you're doing bigrams or trigrams, the units that you give, those tokens, would still be understood as a set, but you would have sets that maintain some of the ordering. Cat sat on, like in a trigram here. So these things can be helpful in shallow language processing models. Again, because when we're doing bag of words, we are able to sneak in some of the word order for these types of models. Okay. So just to make certain that we're clear on n-grams, I mean, there is, for example, I found out that TensorFlow has a utility for creating n-gram tokenization for you. So if we pass in a set of 1 grams that have already been split, so this will just split on the white space, and we run it. So here I show it this way. So the textbook says, so sometimes when you're doing a bigram or a 2-gram model, you'll send in both the 1 grams and the 2 grams. Okay. So, or you can just send in the just use the bigrams, right? So sometimes this might be better, sometimes this might be better, depending on the system that you're trying to build. So you'll see it done either way. So this is strictly the complete set of bigrams that are possible for our sentence, but we might send in, we might build up our dictionary using the combined set of the unigrams and the bigrams. We're doing natural language processing system. Okay. Okay, so the next step after standardizing your text and tokenizing it in vectorizing your text is to do vocabulary indexing. So once the text is split into tokens, you have to encode each word into a numerical representation. So in practice, this is almost always done by building an index of all terms. So you have to build up a dictionary of your term, and you assign it a unique index number. So, the simplest approach is just to build like an actual Python dictionary, and just start at index 1. So if you see a word, you look it up. If it's already in the dictionary, you don't assign it an index. If it's not in the dictionary, you assign it the next index number and increment the index by 1. Okay, so it's easy to build up that kind of a indexing dictionary. So it's common to restrict vocabulary to the top most frequent words. So it'll depend on what would work best for your application, but we'll be using usually like a cutoff of the 10,000 most frequent words. Again, this helps the model, so you don't get a lot of information for words that are rare, that don't occur in very many texts. Okay? It may not necessarily, a token may not necessarily exist. Like when we're doing inference, so when we're looking at text that we didn't use for training, we might come across words that weren't in the original text that we trained with, so wouldn't be in this vocabulary index that we build up. So there's usually at least two special tokens. So for special applications you'll need more, but they're almost always going to be a mass token and a out of vocabulary token. So the one I was talking about is the example of the out of vocabulary. So if you come across a situation when you're trying to make an inference on using your model, you can find words that weren't in the original training set, so you need a special token. So that's the OOV token. So we'll be using index 1 for OOV. And the ignore token. So there's going to be some special things that you want models to ignore, so you give it a mass token. So for example, what we're going to be using it for is when we standardize our vectors, they need to be all the same size. So if we have some sample text, some sentences that are smaller than whatever the size we specify, we're going to use the mass token or all zeros in order to pad it out so it's the same length. Okay, and again, just to make this completely clear, our text shows an example of doing this. So if you want to do this by hand, it's relatively easy if you don't have to worry about real world things where you're going to have a lot of edge cases and stuff. So the stuff we've described so far, if we have a data set, a corpus of, we're just using regular strings as our representation of samples. So we've got 3 samples in our data set corpus here. Let's say we want to do those 3 steps: standardize, tokenize, and build up a vocabulary index. Okay, so for example, standardizing one particular sample, like the things we described, typical things are we just make everything lowercase, and we remove all the punctuation. So the second part here is just removing all the punctuation for a sample that's given, like commas, and that's all I had here. But yeah, we could have added other things. So maybe these are sentences or something. I guess there was a period in this sentence. Tokenization. So again, it can be more complex than this. So we might need to do some word stemming, like you can consider that part of standardizing or tokenizing. But here, we can again use a built-in string method to just split. This will split on spaces and tabs and new lines and things. And indexing, right? So this is simple to do in Python that has high-level dictionaries, right? So we create a vocabulary dictionary that's going to map strings. So it's going to map our tokens into an index. Okay. So we start out by putting in our 2 special tokens, or the mass token at index 0 and the unknown or the out of value token for index 1. And then for each word in our data set, so for each sample in our data set, we first standardize it and tokenize it. And then for each token in the tokens, after we tokenized it, if the token's not in the vocabulary, we add it in. Okay. And this is, we could have kept track of what the next index is. This does the same thing. So right now, the length of our vocabulary is 2. So the first unseen word gets assigned in index 2, and now the length of the vocabulary is 3. Okay. So, that's our resulting vocabulary index for that corpus that we had. So I got assigned index 2, right to 3, and so on. Right? And then we could do, for example, a one-hot encoding, right? So, or a multi-hot encoding, both of which we've seen before. So if we want to encode, if we want to treat this as a bag of words, and we need a representation, right now our corpus has 12, has a size of 12, so we would end up with a vector of size 12. And for one hot encoding, we would just have 1 for the word, the index that represents again. So that was 6 here. So that should be index 6 of our 12 here. Okay, and then everything that we just did here can be implemented with Python, as we saw, to make it a little bit more realistic and useful. We could make a vectorizer class for doing our text vectorization. All right, so basically, and we'll go over these again. These are the same functions we had before. We made a function out of the vocabulary indexing part, and this class, the basic methods are we encode a sample text, and we can decode it, right? So to use something like this, we could use our vectorizer class, where you first have to do the 3 steps on the corpus by calling the make vocabulary. So that takes in a data set, so a corpus. So the result of that was our vocabulary, and as just as an example, we added in a inverse vocabulary so that we can do the reverse, take an index and find the word that was assigned to it. And then we can use, once you have that set up, so that's really all pre-processing steps. So then you can use that to like encode a sentence into a sequence of integers, and decode it back into words. So this sentence wasn't in the original corpus, and there was one word that wasn't in there, so that was where the out of value token, or the unknown token, came into. So, but as you can imagine, so this is one of the things you can get from the Keras API. There's a text vectorization class that will do all this. Plus, of course, it handles a lot more edge cases. It has more options for more specialized things that you might need to do. So, if we wanted a text vectorizer that's going to do the same, it's going to make integer indexes for our words, we can create it like this. If you need to, so often it's there's a need to customize the standardization in the tokenization process. So this is an example of doing that, although we're just doing the same standardization, so making everything lowercase, and removing all punctuation, and we're just splitting on white space for the custom split function here. So, but then, so this is the same using the Keras TextVectorization object, but now we're showing passing some custom standardization and tokenization functions. Right? So with that created, our previous example that we did by hand, we can use pretty much the same sort of workflow, right? So if we have a corpus, the adapt method is what builds the vocabulary index, does the splitting and tokenization on all these using the tokenization function and the standardization function to build up the index. And you can encode sentences and decode them, although it doesn't have an inconvenient inverse vocabulary, so we have to sort of do that ourselves to decode it back into our English sentences. So, okay, so that's it for this video. So just to summarize the important parts that we went over in this video. So vectorizing in this context for natural language processing is the process of transforming a corpus of text samples into numeric tensors that are suitable for being processed by a neural network deep learning system. Okay, so that process, there's 3 main parts that you'll always have to do. You have to standardize your text. For example, we just showed making everything lowercase and removing punctuation. Often there'll have to be more things to standardization than that. Tokenize the text. That's just splitting it up into units. And then those units constitute the vocabulary of the model that you're trying to build. So you have to vectorize those. So you usually have to create a vocabulary index. So that's the common way you assign an index to every token that you have in your corpus. So that gives you a dictionary, a unique mapping from each token to the index. So once you have that mapping, you can convert sequences of tokens. So you can convert a sentence, you can standardize and tokenize it, and then you can convert that into a sequence of integers, which is suitable for being encoded like a one-hot encoding or a multi-hot encoding or in other ways. Okay, So that's it. I hope that that helped you understand the first part of working with text in doing natural language processing. And in the next video, we'll get into actually building some models with those representations.